Good morning, everybody, and welcome again to Procrastinator's Pit Stop. We have another amazing guest for you today, Wayne Brown. Wayne is a dedicated mental health counselor and university educator who specializes in areas such as trauma, family connectedness, and LGBTQ plus support, striving to advocate for and empower his patients. Wayne, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, we're happy to have you. Now, before we dive into things, we do like to have an icebreaker on the show. And your question today is which cartoon character do you resonate with the most and why?
Oh, okay, that's a tough one. I guess my initial instinct would be to go something related to the Inside Out movies, tool that I do use a lot with my clients, especially my younger clients. Um, but in Inside Out, all the characters have like their designated roles, so it's tough to uh, pin into the one overarching role outside of the child. So or the switchboard, but that's not too helpful. So I guess I'd go with Foghorn Leghorn from Looney Tunes. He's smart, somewhat overbearing at times, and kind of a know-it-all. And I do teach university, so sometimes I need to get that super smarty voice.
Okay, well, I think it's a really good example. I like that one. Certainly one of my favorite characters from Looney Tunes growing up. So yeah, I like that one. So Wayne, why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to be where you are today?
Yeah. Uh, it was an indirect journey. I mean, talk about series of procrastination pit stops. Um, I starting at younger life, I grew up in the medical establishment. From 8 days old, I had a strange uh, issue with my thyroid where I wasn't producing the enough amount of thyroid. So I basically lived at Children's Hospital growing up. Fast forward to my early 30s, I ended up back in the medical system after developing a pituitary tumor that had me all over the medical system. Um, in that time, I also taught high school for quite a bit of time in the city of Buffalo, inner city schools, some of the more impoverished schools in the system. Um, as I was dealing with my medical stuff, the challenges of the work in the system just became too much, and you begin to ask the question, is the benefit worth the stress? Went and ran my charity full time, and long story, much shorter. I ended up going back to grad school for my master's in social work and have just my career has been on track ever since.
Well, that is quite a journey in it, and it sounds like you've had your fair share of challenges. What do you think was the biggest challenge you had to face, though?
I guess all challenges have had their own degree of difficulty. I'm not trying to dodge the question. Um, but I think I get this a lot from my clients where they'll go and compare my challenge is huge to me but smaller compared to someone else. And I tend to be of the mindset that your challenge in the moment is how you define its size for the moment. So, like when I was younger and I was dealing with the medical issues I was back then, it was all encompassing. And fast forward, you know, many decades later, and I manage it just by taking a teeny tiny pill every morning to keep my thyroid balanced. So, is it a big deal today? No. Was it a huge deal for my family and for myself back then? Yeah. So, all challenges need to be measured by the moment I.
Well, it's true, and everybody's different, right? But and everybody's challenge is big or small comparatively. I mean, we need to respect that at the time those challenges are the challenges. I often equate it to Mount Everest, right? So some people say that climbing Mount Everest is a big deal. Well, thousands of people do it every year now. So,
Right.
but it's still a big deal. So I usually say, okay, so back when the first person did it, that was their Everest. And for somebody else, just getting out of bed in the morning might be their Everest, right?
That's
So I guess we just
exactly
need
it.
to, just be mindful of that. But what you
Let
said made a
people
lot of
be where
sense.
they are.
Yeah. No, but what you said made a lot of sense too. So, back then it was a big deal,
Mhm.
but after you're actually out of it, it's not such a big deal.
Well, and it's funny, Chris, because you talk about the first person to climb Everest. I'm actually the first person to be born without a functional pituitary or a functional thyroid rather, that ended up to go on to live a productive adult life. Back when I was first born, someone with this particular thyroid disorder was generally put into a group home for as long as they lived, and that was about it. And I just so happened to have the right pediatrician who happened upon a random journal article about experimentation with levothyroxine in infants. And he said, our choice is either this or uh, a very negative story. And asked my parents, which would you rather do? Which is, as a parent, kind of a no brainer. Would you like to take this long shot or be sentenced to certain doom? I don't know. That's a toughie.
No, but that's sounds like since you're really lucky, and then we're great. Thank you for sharing because I imagine that it at least at first probably wasn't easy sharing something like that. So we appreciate that. And you mentioned that you went sort of back and forth through procrastination quite a bit. Um, what do you think was kind of your toughest moment of procrastination?
Think when you take a lot of hits, it's sometimes tough to get off the mat. And part of the arc of my story was that that middle arc that I didn't show earlier. In 1999, I had an auto accident that did some pretty bad damage to my lower back. And at the time, it just felt like I was taking all the hits. So it became really difficult to motivate myself to get from day to day. Uh, Fast forward decades later, I realized I was going through a massive depression, and no one had the insight to say, hey, maybe you need to talk to someone. Because in 1999, you know, being a real man meant we don't talk about our problems. We just swallow hard and, take our anti-ulcer medication and keep going.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I know there's no silver bullet in terms of treating and beating procrastination, but I'm sure that you see this all the time. And what are some of the things that, or what is maybe one or two things that you recommend to people to try and get out of a state of procrastination?
Procrastination serves a function when it's happening. Um, Sometimes it is just a side effect of like an issue like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, in which case the procrastination isn't purely I just can't be bothered. It's a symptom of the diagnosis. And sometimes it's I genuinely am putting off this different thing. So I guess when I'm working with individuals who are procrastinating, I will ask them, what's the block on this? And for some of my clients, it's I have this thing that I really, really want to do that would bring me joy. And I'm afraid of how it will be received by others. So there's always another perceived wall. I can't do it today because this thing, and I can't do it today because this thing. I think one of the problems that goes hand in hand with procrastination is perfectionism. And that is, if I can't do it perfectly, I can't do it yet. And the reality is, whatever we do, we're not going to do it perfectly. We're going to do it as well as we're going to do it. And hopefully, next time we do it a little better because we have more experience. But doing things for the first time is always going to be less than what we hoped for. And honoring that reality and going forward to learning is where growth happens.
No, I'm glad you mentioned the perfectionism thing and how to get out there. Some advocates say that the kind of the best way to get that and to understand if you're truly good at something is to do it 100 times. Do you think that that holds true?
I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell, and he wrote the book on doing something for 10,000 hours and you are considered proficient at it. Um, he has since kind of pulled back on the 10,000 hour definition. Um, I think that's good. I think the more you do something, the more comfortable you get at it. But I could play piano for a million hours and never be on stage. Yeah, some people have a natural gift and some people have a desire. And I think if we choose to work hard at something that we find pleasure in and something that we have at least somewhat a natural ability to do, then we can grow into proficiency. But, like my middle child is they're 10 years old and already far better an artist than I will ever be in my life. I love art. I love going to the museums. Can admire art from now until forever. I will never be able to paint you a picture that looks like anything I intended it to. So I appreciate what my child can do because that's not in my skill set. Does that
No,
make
you
sense?
touched on something really interesting, and I actually noticed it in my own daughter as well. Do you think that in terms of art, what and I find this fascinating myself. Do you think it's more motor skills, or do you think it's more like mental you know uh, mentality or mindset when it comes to maybe not being able to be proficient in art like the greats?
I think it's a willful ability to be completely in your creative brain. Like I am way too analytical to paint a representation of a starfish in a pond. Have I don't have the creative ability and I don't have the patience. Yeah, it's like some people can sit down and relax uh to fiction literature and a wonderful day of fiction actually gives me anxiety. So like I can sit and read a nonfiction book that is like doorstop thickness and be enraptured. Um, there's a book that I use excerpts with my students, a really fascinating book. I call it a page turner. It's called Poverty Inc. And it's all about how the United States has monetized poverty. Fascinating, fascinating book. I read the whole thing in a weekend with notes all over the margins. It was a fantastic book. For me to sit down and read a fairy tale story about Prince going after his princess, and there's all sorts of drama and excitement and cliffhangers. I'm not getting through the first chapter. I don't have I don't have the part of my brain that still allows me to be creative. This is one of the reasons why when I work with younger children, when I work with children who still have those imagination parts of their brain and their parents are like, stop procrastinating, do your homework. I think there's value in the child doing
No,
that.
I like that you say that, but I mean, it's a tough spot for parents sometimes too, right? Because we want our children to be successful, and society tells us that to be successful, you go to school, you follow the rules, you do your homework, you do your best. It doesn't necessarily give room for doodling in the margins or anything like that. Is there any correlation, like in your work, have you seen any correlation between anything that would justify a parent's fear in that they're, too creative?
I think uh, an individual who slowly leans into conforming is going to not be as successful as someone who can work outside the lines, outside the rules. I am a rule follower when it is appropriate, when it is intended, when it is necessary. And if I'm advocating for a client and I need to metaphorically doodle in the margins, I am going to do it as far and as hard as I can. And that's where my creativity comes in. I will use my creative brain in my powers for good to help advocate for others who need a help up. So I believe that there is a space for creativity. I believe that there is a space for math, science, English, literature, but um, an individual who is well rounded, an individual who does uh, enjoy creativity will be a generally more successful adult. I love having my kids read. I'm not sure if you remember this from the 80s, the Choose Your Own Adventure book series. I loved those books growing up. And I, much like most of us who read it, kind of cheated where I'd choose a path and I didn't like where the path went. So I chose a different path. It kind of turned me into a social worker because I did get to see where, okay, if I choose this path, this is going to happen. If I choose this path, this is going to happen. That's what I do as a therapist, as a counselor. What are our options? What happens if we choose A versus B versus
I like that. In terms of, I used to read those books all the time, and yeah, the same. I used to keep my thumb in the page, and this is turn to this page, and like, oh nope, go back to the where I had my thumb, right?
Oh,
Um,
I get so annoyed of it. Turn to page 37 if this, and you turn to page 37 and there's a paragraph. Oh, you're dead. Great.
yeah. And then if you didn't have your thumb there, you're like, oh, where did I go? So you start over
Right.
again. Yeah. Um, I can sort of see that as a double-edged sword, even just, sort of sitting here analyzing, just myself even. I wonder if reading those books when I was younger had any effect on, you said this as a therapist, you look at the different things and you see possibilities and potential outcomes. And I'm just wondering if, maybe uh, in some cases it could maybe lead to a little bit of analysis paralysis, or do you think that is more related to the number of choices or the complexity of the outcome?
I think analysis paralysis comes in when we get into the perfection space. Yeah, it's it's willing acceptance that whatever I do for the first time, I'm not going to be great at it. The first time anyone did anything, like I told you before we went on air, this morning I've been sitting and grading student videos of them doing therapy with their peers. And these are all first year social work students, and they're all doing good for where they are and where they should be. And if they're doing therapy at this quality 10 years from now, I will be very frightened for their client. But for where they are right now and where they should be right now, they're right where I want them to be. And some are a little ahead of where I want them to be. And still, those are people that I don't want to see them in that space 10 years.
Well, that's it's an interesting it's an interesting conundrum, right? Because if I'm working in a factory and we know that you're on the assembly line and you're putting, I don't know, bottles on tops on bottles or something, or
Hmm.
making screws or whatever the case may be. If you do 100 of them and they come out, at 60%, you'd expect the next 100 to come out at 65, the next 100 to come out at 70. But if they're working at the same assembly line for 10 years and they're still doing the same 65%, then there's an issue. At what point do, and this gets into, I guess, a lot of education too. At what point do you step in and say, maybe this isn't the right track for you?
Yeah. And over the course of my career, I've worked with many people who have come to me and said, my therapist told me this. And I hear what they say, and I just kind of like wince a little because based on what the client is reporting, I worry that that wasn't the most helpful insight. I also wasn't in the room at the moment that it happened for me to know what encouraged that therapist to say that in that moment, A, and B, whether or not the client is being a genuine reporter to what happened in that moment. So it's taking what they say and acknowledging that I only have a fraction of the information. Um, I think no matter what we do in life, we have our good days and we have our bad days. Yeah, I know that as a therapist, every person who I sit with, I try to give them the 100% of my best self. And do, does any therapist really ever achieve 100% of themselves? It would be extraordinarily difficult. I don't care what you do as a profession, to be at 100% of the time it's it's an impossible task, and you're again setting yourself up for that analysis paralysis of, if I'm not perfect, I just won't do it. Then we're getting back to procrastination and underserving ourselves as well as the people who we're attempting to serve.
No, that's a great insight too. It kind of fits into that saying, you do the best. Everyone does the best that they can with the information they have that's currently available to them. And you know, uh, I've heard people come in this, they beat themselves up all the time. And the example I love to use this example is, you trust doctors, right? More or less, right? Well, back in the 1950s, they had the big, the big push on Camel and Marlboro cigarettes. All doctors smoke Camels.
Right.
They're ones that say cigarettes are healthy, right? But it's not like they were going out of their way to give you cancer. It's just that 30 years later, they're like, yeah, we might be giving you cancer, and then 40 years, they're like, yeah, we're probably giving you cancer, but
Can I take that analogy and bring it a step forward?
hey, by all means, I'm always here to learn.
You're familiar with the drug heroin?
Yeah,
Do you know who patented it?
can't say that I do.
Bayer aspirin. And it was sold, if you were to go and Google Bayer heroin ads, they still linger around the marketplace. And it was marketed as a pain reliever, and that it helped with emotional regulation, and it helped, I believe, for skin and clarity of mind.
Well, that's that's definitely interesting.
Yeah,
That one's how recent was that?
that was 1930s, 40s, I believe.
Okay. So around the same time as the Marlboros and around the same
Correct.
time as Everything Goes Better with, well, that was a little bit earlier. Everything Goes Better with Coke. That was
Hmm. Hmm. And that was when they had a pinch of cocaine in every can or every bottle. I
yeah, yeah.
I actually use that same phrase of everyone's doing the best they can with the information they have available when I am working with my adolescents who are struggling because their parents or guardians or loved ones are not understanding of their struggle with pronouns, their struggle with sexuality, their struggle with gender. Is your parents, your adults are doing the best they can right now, and they're not there yet. How do we help them get there, get to where they need to be?
Yeah, exactly. I like that one. And I always used to, my mom and dad always used to joke about that a lot. You didn't come with an instruction manual, just, he just came out.
That's 100% true. That is 100% true. Like I said, I got three kids and they all operate with three completely different instruction manuals. What will stimulate and motivate one will absolutely crush the soul of another.
Yeah, it's just, it's interesting. Just on that subject, I'm curious where you stand. Nature versus nurture. I mean, this is a long-standing sort of, dialogue in parenting, especially. What do you usually tell in parents in that situation?
It's both and it's partially nature, it's partially nurture. If you've got someone who grew up in a home that lacked for stable food and lacked for stable shelter, and when perhaps one of the parents was emotionally or physically abusive, I don't care if Albert Einstein is growing up in that home, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult to get up over that. And conversely, someone who is naturally somewhat mediocre, but grows up in a supportive home with parents who are well educated and provide the child a high quality education and all the best opportunities, they are naturally going to achieve a better adult result. So I think, yeah, naturally, can we be more adept? Of course. And naturally, can we be more in tune with the will to persist over setbacks? Absolutely. I feel like I am case one example of. Um, I think also without my parents being there saying, I don't care how bad it is, you're getting up and doing this thing today, I very easily could have fallen down and not getting up many times before. But yeah, my parents were both very involved, but my mother was absolutely a drill sergeant. And she was the kindest drill sergeant ever, but she defined FAFO, and if I fluffed around, she made sure I got back on task. And I am tremendously appreciative of her because I do the same thing with my kids. I am extremely supportive and loving, and I'll be there and I'll give you a hug and we'll talk through it and then go out and do the hard thing because that's what we do.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. It's I think right now though it is difficult for parents to do both, right? Because you have very conflicting messages. You're not their friend, but be their friend. You're not their and then in the end, once they're grown up, it's like you're their, you're their parent and their guardian, but now they're adults, so now you got to step back. So it's like be involved, don't be involved, then don't be involved, be involved.
I want parents to I want parents to be their ally. I want parents to be their resource. I do not want them to be their buddy. Does the child need mental and emotional support? Absolutely, 100%. And if our child just suffered a crushing loss, you can be supportive and loving without being their buddy. Yeah, I have parents who want to be the cool parent and turn their head if they're smoking weed, and they say, well, smoking cannabis is legal now in the United States, only for people 21 and over. And the medical information right now that's coming out says smoking cannabis at younger than 25 is extraordinarily dangerous because it has impact on the frontal cortex. And as we age out, into more adulthood, those youthful experiences with cannabis can greatly impact our mental health and mental well-being. So if you're having a holiday party and you want to give your kid a sip of your wine or your sip of your beer, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. But, if you and your 12-year-old are toasting each other with beer cans and the 12-year-old is drinking a full beer while watching the sport game of your choice, that's not what your child needs to be more successful. They need you to be their ally, but they also need you to be their adult.
Gotcha.
And because I said so is never an answer.
Mm. Oh, I definitely agree with that one just because, you know, uh, I think everybody relates to the little defier, right? We don't like being told what to do, especially at a young age, especially if we don't understand that it doesn't make sense. And I mean, we do this for adults all the time. We tell them to do something, but we tell them why. With kids, it's just like, oh, I said so.
Yeah, and that's the thing is with parents who do come at me with, well, I'm the adult and I can say because I said so. Okay, cool. So let's run a little scenario. And tomorrow you go into work and your boss chews you out in front of your peers and says, you need to go do this project right now that you don't think is as important as what you're working on. And you seek clarification, and the boss says, because I said so, that's why. I pay your salary. How are you going to receive that feedback? And if you're going to be on Indeed within an hour of that conversation, maybe you should consider that when you're dealing with your kids.
No, that's a good insight too. I always like that other one too. You were talking about the drill. She's very like almost like a drill sergeant, right?
Mhm.
That's almost akin to because I said so is almost akin to that's need to know and you don't need to know.
Right. That's exactly it. Kids deserve to know because kids are going to be adults. And if they don't, if we don't model for them how to make decisions and why to make decisions, how do we expect them to know how to make more positive decisions as they get older?
That is that's a very powerful bit of information right there because it's true. If I just tell my daughter, for example, just to I don't want you to go out and hang out with that person. That person is doing drugs or maybe they're doing graffiti or maybe it's something as innocuous as they're wearing makeup, and I say I don't want her to get into that for any number of reasons, right? But you don't tell them why, then they're just say, oh, I'm doing it anyway.
That's exactly it. Parents who, yeah, they set a hard line and there's no engagement with the child. I'm nipping this in the bud and I am controlling my household and I don't need to explain to you. That's why. Okay, I want you to think back to when you were 10, 11, 12, 13, 15, 17, and your parents made capricious decisions that you disagreed with. Did you ever sneak around? Yeah, my kid's never going to have a cell phone. They don't need that technology, really, because, they can go up to any convenience store or gas station in their town and get a flip phone. So I would, get a burner phone or get whatever. You don't need a credit check for a burner phone. And if my kid has a phone and I know what's going on and I'm involving my kid in decision making as to, yes, I'm totally okay with you texting with this friend, but this friend is more problematic to me. Let me explain why. They get to develop bias. What we want is for them to understand why we're making the decisions we're making. So hopefully they can decide that, you know what? I would really love to be able to chat with Sally outside of school, but Sally has a history of making me feel bad about myself when she's having a hard time. So maybe it's best that I don't talk to her outside of school.
Yeah. No, that definitely, and I think it makes a big difference too how you were raised, right? Like I even noticed the differences between how I was raised as opposed to my daughter, and I don't even really think about some of the time. So it just I'm making these decisions based on how I was raised. I'm sure it's in some level, but it's interesting to see the difference between, especially between parenting styles between parents, and how when one parent doesn't see eye to eye with the other parent, how do you sort of even start to tackle
My general rule of thumb, if I have parents who are strongly opinionated, is that first person to decide is the decision maker, and that's it. And unless what they decided is significantly detrimental, we go with that and work from there. Um, Basically, because if it's all subject to negotiation, then the child's gonna learn to play one parent versus the other and do what we call splitting. So yeah, my child comes to me, Dad, hey, there's candy in the foyer for Halloween. Can I have a piece? Well, no, it's close to dinner. Well, Mom let me yesterday. Okay. Well, that was yesterday, and I appreciate that you got that treat yesterday. Today, the answer is no. If my spouse were to then peek their head around the corner and say, come on, it's just one piece, now the child knows where to go to.
it?
Sometimes my spouse makes a decision that I disagree with, and my kids will come to me, and the first thing I ask is, what did your other parent say? And I may deeply disagree, but I'll be like, whatever they said is what goes. This is the value of if you have big decisions to make, send the kids out of the room and talk together so you have a united front. Don't just shoot from the hip and make, yeah. Little Janie wants to join the school band, but there's $100 deposit for the instrument. And you know what? We don't have $100 this month. This needs to be a parent decision before the child is looped in. And it's not saying because I said so to say, you know what, let me talk to your other parent and we'll let you know later. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I greatly.
For sure, because you expect communication in any relationship. So why wouldn't you expect it, in that dynamic with your child as well?
And then
Uh,
if you do decide that, you know what, we can't afford it, saying to the child, I really want you to be in band this year. I wish we could, but right now that $100 is keeping the lights on. So let's make sure that between now and next year, we're saving money that's specifically set aside just for bands. So that way you can be. And then the kid can feel invested and the kid can decide whether or not the dollar they found in the streets goes to buy a can of soda or goes to the band uniform.
that does make a lot of sense. We're coming up pretty close to time here, Wayne. It's been a great conversation. Do you think that there's anything that I didn't ask that maybe I should have asked, or anything that we should have covered that maybe we didn't cover?
God, this is the kind of stuff that I can go on for hours and hours on. Um, I hope this was fruitful for the folks who are listening. And, you know, if they do have more questions, I am available. Uh, uh, willowgrovecounseling.net, and they can reach me that way, and I'm more than happy to engage with them.
Excellent. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Wayne. And so, what would be the best way? Would the best way just be through your website then to contact you? No social media, no LinkedIn, nothing like. Okay. And to all our listeners, don't worry. We will put that in the show notes so that you don't have to, worry about writing it down or anything like that. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Wayne. It was a pleasure. A lot of great information. I'm sure that our audience also thought so. Just to our audience, thank you for tuning in again. And just remember, if you can't find that motivation or inspiration for yourself today, maybe just be that motivation or inspiration for someone else. And we'll see you again next time.